We are so thrilled this week that we are bringing to you for the first time a topic that one of you has requested. One of the members of our channel community has actually requested a video on this Mexican historical figure. So here it is. We're so happy to provide this information, and it was wonderful to learn about this important historical independence leader in Mexico. But first, this is Latina Literati. If you enjoy amazing stories, wonderful people from past and present, and great books, then this is the channel for you. Vicente Ramón Guerrero Saldaña was baptized in August 1782. And Guerrero is a perfect name for him because he was indeed a warrior. Guerrero in Spanish means warrior. And he would be one of the most important men in the Mexican independence movement against Spain. Vicente Guerrero was a statesman, he was a leader, one of the most important generals from the south of Mexico, and he would be the Mexican nation's second president. Guerrero was born near Acapulco to a land-owning family. He worked in his family's business, and he basically drove mules. There was a freight and transport business, and at that time they used mules. So he was disparagingly later called a mule driver. But it is of note that because of the mules, he was able to travel to different parts of Mexico to meet many people, and that's where he first learned of the idea of independence from Spain. He would go on to fight in the wars for independence against Spain, even though his family was allied with the Spanish representatives in Mexico. His famous phrase was, "La patria primero," my country comes first. In 1810, Vicente Guerrero would join the forces, the Mexican forces against Spain. Now you have to understand, at that time, Spain had one of the best trained armies. And really what you're talking about is a lot of indigenous people, all sorts of people truly who had no military training that came together and basically rose up against Spain. And he slowly worked through the ranks over the next 10 years to lead the largest force in southern Mexico. Spain at that time was in political turmoil, and so there wasn't the decisiveness that there might have been in other attempts in the past for independence from Mexico. And so Guerrero, as the head of the southern forces, would come together with the forces from central Mexico, from northern Mexico, and march triumphantly into Mexico City to take the place of the Spanish authorities and proclaim Mexico a free nation in September of 1821. One of the other generals, Iturbide, was declared emperor, and Guerrero and his forces rebelled. The U.S. representative in Mexico, for whom some say the Poinsettia is named, a man by the name of John Poinsettia, helped establish Masonic lodges in Mexico and recruited leaders like Guerrero. So really what's happening now is you have different groups supporting different generals as they fight each other for the power and have the ability to head this new nation of Mexico. Guadalupe Victoria is named the first president of Mexico. What a good name, because Victoria means victory. And so he has finished his term in 1828, and all of a sudden there's an election. And Guerrero comes in second, but nobody likes the guy who came in first. So Santa Anna, General Santa Anna, the famous General Santa Anna, and his northern armies rebel against the new president and support Guerrero as the second president. General Gomez Pedraza, who had won the presidency, who had gotten the most votes, before he even takes office, he resigns because there are skirmishes, there's bloodshed, and he says, "I want no part of this," and he leaves. So Guerrero is then named president, and then therefore he is considered the second president of Mexico. In 1829, when Vicente Guerrero is proclaimed president of Mexico, a lot of the elites are just taken aback. Here's a man who had been a mule driver. There are disparaging remarks in the newspapers because he's considered someone who is not of European descent. He is considered someone who is melanin enhanced. There aren't any portraits that we know of that were taken during his very brief rule in Mexico, but there are some posthumous portraits that we'll show you throughout this video that definitely show that he had some mixture, maybe indigenous, maybe African, we're not sure, but we definitely know that he was a man of whom they described as having an aquiline nose and tawny or tan skin. So there was a lot of resentment from what we could call now the oligarchy or the ruling families that called him a mule driver. How could this mule driver become president of Mexico? And he became president of Mexico because he was a brilliant tactician and he knew how to bring people together, and he worked really from his heart for the people of Mexico. In fact, some say he is considered the greatest Mexican that ever lived. One of the most important acts that Vicente Guerrero immediately puts into place is he declares that slavery is abolished in Mexico in 1829. It's one of his first official acts, and especially the northern neighbor, the U.S., is quite upset by this because you'll recall that in the U.S. there is still slavery, but in Mexico, slavery is now abolished, and this is Guerrero's gift to his people. Guerrero is calling for the first public schools. He's calling for land reform. He's calling for development of trade and industry. He sets up the first groups of people that could represent their communities and their towns without any requirement of race, without any requirement of education, and without a requirement of being a landholder, which were requirements to serve as representatives in the past. And so what he's saying is you, the people, deserve to represent your own and come to decisions for your own well-being. So for this, and so for many other reasons, but basically for all of the reasons I've mentioned, he was definitely going against the economic interests of the ruling elite, and he is quickly deposed by his vice president. When Anastasio Bustamante takes over as president, basically deposes Guerrero with the support of the ruling elites, the South rises up to defend their beloved son. And the war would have gone on much longer had there not been one of the greatest betrayals of Mexican history. An Italian sea captain by the name of Francesco Picalupa says, "I will lure Guerrero to my ship for dinner in exchange for 50,000 pesos. For me, those are just another 7 pieces of silver. To have someone lure such a great person onto a ship and then he is taken immediately to the north, he's court-martialed, and he's executed." And this is really important because all the other generals who had any part in any of these movements were allowed to simply go into exile. Iturbide and all the others simply were allowed to go into exile. What was the difference here? Why would someone who represented the classes who were traditionally subjugated by the Spanish and by the ruling elites immediately get executed? I think we all know the response. It was basically to send a message, you need to stay in your place. So it's huge difference between Vicente Guerrero and the other generals that ended up not being in power and were allowed to simply leave the country. Those responsible for his murder, what they call the political murder of the First Order in Mexico, spent the rest of their lives defending themselves. They never again would regain the reputation. They were just tainted with having murdered such an important person in Mexican history. Finally, in 1842, his remains are interred in Mexico City with honors as they should have been from the beginning. Guerrero is best known for his fight for liberty, his unceasing political discourse, always trying to fight for the equal rights of all, especially those that came from the trades, that came from the peasantry, that came from the indigenous groups that had suffered so much under Spain. Many described him as the greatest leader Mexico has ever produced, and he's a man that we should know more about. The state of Guerrero in Mexico is named for him, and there are places all over Mexico that are named for this great historical figure from Mexico. And now for my favorite part of the video, the book recommendations. I was quite surprised by the lack of books in English about Vicente Guerrero, and most of them were academic. I didn't really find any really good novels that you have written about all of the leaders of the world. Why do you think someone that came from classes that weren't part of the oligarchy would not have so many things written about him? I think we need to write a book about him. So if there are any authors out there, I really encourage you to do this. This is a book that needs to be written. And I can just see it. It could be a movie. It could be a series. This is an amazing man with an amazing life. But anyway, the first book is simply a very academic book in English, and it's the life of Vicente Guerrero. It's called Vicente Guerrero, Mexican Liberator by Sprague. And so, again, this is something to read if this figure is of interest to you. And as always, check your library, check your local bookseller. And if neither of those are available to you, we will include in the description box links so that you can purchase these books, if you like, new or used, from independent booksellers online. The next book actually takes place after all of this happens, but I thought it's a fabulous book to share. It's called In the Shadow of the Angel by Catherine Blair, and it is considered Mexico's Gone with the Wind. It is a novel of about 30 years of political upheaval in Mexico, and it's the story of an amazing woman. It's the story of what they consider the beginning of modern Mexican culture. Antonieta Rivas Mercado was a woman to be reckoned with. She was brilliant, and she had friends like Frida Kahlo and many other writers and intellectuals of that time. She threw her entire being and all of her resources behind a candidate that she supported during all of this tumultuous time, and when he lost, she took her son and exiled to Paris. An amazing story, a wonderful woman. Highly recommend this book. This really gives you a vignette to the Mexican life during the time that she was alive. So really recommend it. Thank you so much for watching this video. We would love to know what it is you're reading this summer. Let us know the topics that you'd like us to talk about. This was the first one that was suggested by one of you, and we would love to do more of those. We would love you to subscribe to Latina Literati, and we also want to thank all of you for your support. We're so excited that you have enjoyed these videos, and we are inching up closer to 1,000 subscribers. So it's really wonderful to see the support for these historical videos. Thank you so much. And as always, con mucho cariño, mucho salud y mucho amor. Gracias.